So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be a fairly high level but simple guide. And by the end of it, we will get on to why COP26 and all its related activities are relevant to the SME sector. Now I need to work out how to advance my slides. There we go. So webinar, cameras on or off is up to you. Audio, please keep your mics muted unless you're asking a question. Chat, please introduce yourself in the chat function, which should be on your screen. Your business and your reason for being here. It's really just so that other people and Liz and I know kind of, you know, what people's background is. Questions, we have a chunk of time, hopefully at the end for questions. Please put them in the question box, or if you want to ask them in person, then, you know, switch your mic on, raise your hand. And if we have any technical issues, and if we lose sound or vision, please stay with us. We will do everything we can to get back to you. I know it can be frustrating and you're just staring at a blank screen going, what do I do next? So actions on, hang on until at least the end of the allotted time. Brief agenda. We're going to look at the big picture. What is a COP? A bit of jargon busting. What COP26, the one we're in Glasgow, might achieve. What the EU's role is. We're not in the EU, but they still have a very significant role to play here. A bit about what the UK is up to. And a little bit on next steps, a little bit about me, just to help you all. Yeah, I've been doing this sort of thing for about 35 years now. But before, I think the word sustainability really existed. I've worked across a wide variety of sectors, business, public and voluntary, construction, facilities management, defence, land management, oil and gas, justice sector. I've attended several COPs of different sorts. We'll get onto all the different sorts of COPs that are out there, but so I've had real live first-hand experience of what these things are really like. And I'm presently advising a really wide range of clients, from large global corporates down to micro startups and some charities in transition. If you want to find out any more, look me up on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only match with Ron T. Roberts on LinkedIn. So it's relatively easy. So let's talk about the big picture. So COP26, or COP, the UN COP, the climate change COP, it happens every year. It's a global conference. It's about 30,000 delegates in total, and they come from all the UN member states, plus observers. There are official observers for various other UN bodies. Quite a lot of science and academia attend, lots of civil society groups, business groups, media, and lots and lots and lots of protesters. They are talking about, I'm in Glasgow today, in actual fact, and they talk about having up to 200,000 protesters here in Glasgow during the sort of 10 days, 2 weeks of the COP. If I'm deeply cynical, I suspect you won't be able to buy any Gorilla Glue anywhere within about 50 miles of Glasgow for the next few weeks. So it's a major event, and the campus that's being set up down at the SECC is already a huge, great big wall of steel, as you would expect with so many global leaders coming. So what is a COP? Lots of people talk about COPs these days. COP officially stands for Conference of the Parties. And in this case, that it's the parties who have signed any UN agreement. There are lots of COPs. We'll get on to a couple of other COPs that take place a bit later on, but any UN agreement will have some kind of gathering, not always annually. They can be as far apart as 10 years for some of them, but they're always called a COP, and they're the Conference of the Parties. And it brings together, what's really unique about them is it brings together very high level politics, lots and lots of diplomacy and diplomats, so civil servants of lots of different departments all working together, a lot of technical policy making. So if you were to attend a COP and you actually sort of come into you get accredited and you come into the blue zone and you actually go and attend some of the many, many discussions, you'll see rooms full of civil servants working over the wording of the very detailed elements of various agreements. Now, lots of this has gone on beforehand, but lots of it still actually happens in the room on the various days, and COPs are themed. Different things happen on different days to do with finance, nature, carbon, transport, all sorts of different bits and pieces. And there is a huge amount of lobbying that goes on. It is an absolutely lobbying fest. So lots and lots of people trying to express their opinion. And there is a green zone. The blue zone is the accredited zone. The green zone is very much the the open zone where there are lots and lots and lots of effectively trade stands from lots of different people wanting to express opinions, trying to grab the attention of various policymakers, politicians, and the media. So UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the important words there are the fact that it's a framework convention, which means it doesn't have specific must-dos in it. There are other UN conventions which are much more specific, and this one is all about climate change. At the moment, 197 signatories. There is a secretariat based in Bonn, originally based, I think, in Zurich, but now more Geneva. It was in Switzerland to start with, and it moved to Bonn. The executive secretary is currently Patricia Espinosa from Mexico, and she is appointed by the UN Secretary General. In her case, it was Ban Ki-moon. You may hear talk in the media, or instead she turns up quite a lot, a woman called Christiana Figueres. She was the executive secretary for the UNFCCC Secretariat in Paris, and is, I think, widely credited by many people as being her very skilled, and her team's very skilled diplomatic skills, enabled to get 197 countries to agree to something. The Secretary has a staff of about 450 people, and is responsible specifically for both the Kyoto Protocol, which came out of COP16, I think it was, and the Paris Agreement. And we'll talk a bit more about the Paris Agreement next. So signed at COP21 in Paris in 2015. And all the signatures agreed that this is a legally binding international treaty. This is 196 there. I think I said 197 on the previous slide, so might need to double check that. The important thing is that it's a legally binding treaty. Some people will say it was the first time there's ever been a legally binding treaty of this nature. Not entirely true, but certainly this has more teeth to it than anything else. And the ambition behind the thing is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, and preferably 1.5 degrees compared to the pre-industrial levels. Now, I think we've moved on since 2015, and now our targets are 1.5 or less. So it's quite important, that language. And it's to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world. And this, I don't know how well this works. So what's really important about some of these agreements is not so much the emissions targets that we're reaching to cap, which is, we'll get on to net zero stuff, but it's also the area underneath the curve, as they say. It's all the gas, all the greenhouse gases that we've emitted historically, we have to tackle as well. And it's the first time a binding agreement with all these nations to combat climate change and adapt to effects. Yes, that's the spin. It's largely true. There's a lot of talk about net zero. And I suppose the key takeaways when we're talking about net zero and how we can tackle this is net zero is about achieving a balance. We have always, and we will always in the future, emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But what we have not done is removed that. So we have lost the balance. And historically, over time, that balance has got more and more and more out of kilter. It's very, very simple to describe. That's what it is. Net zero is, basically absorbing as much carbon and other greenhouse gases as we emit. It's very hard to measure, and we'll maybe talk a bit about measurement and boundaries and things like that later on. And it's even harder to achieve. We'll talk a lot about transition, and we are looking at some very serious changes to the entire world's way of life. It doesn't have to be arduous. There are no hair shirts. Doesn't have to be any hair shirts involved, but it is going to be a difficult thing to achieve. And just a minor sort of thing to say is that often we talk about saving the planet as a rather sloppy shorthand. We're actually not talking about saving the planet. The planet will continue to be a planet no matter how much carbon we emit. We just won't have a home on it. And I think we need to remember that it's not just about the physical interplanetary geology of this thing. It's about actually our ability to have a quality of life. Another thing that you're going to hear a lot of talk about once COP kicks off, running up to and afterwards, is a thing called science-based targets. Science-based Targets Initiative, which looks after the whole concept of science-based targets, set up by a wide variety of organizations, including the Carbon Disclosure Project and the World Economic Forum. And this was set up to create the main standards for setting and recording emission targets for business. mostly large businesses at this stage. We're still in the fairly early days of it. And all of the targets that go on around the science base of this must be Paris aligned. So you've got to be able to demonstrate when you, as a business, set up science-based targets that you are aligned to that Paris trajectory of 1.5 degrees or better, and that you can demonstrate how you're going to get there. And then you need to constantly report on it. And the Science-Based Targets Initiative will take your target and your evidence, and they will validate it to say, yes, we approve this is okay. And we believe, and then you need to report on whether or not you're going to achieve it. So largely large businesses, and just a quick mention of why this is relevant to the SME community and the startup businesses is that all of us are looking for investor finance, and increasingly investors are wanting to de-risk their portfolio by making sure that whoever they're investing in has understood all the risks around climate change. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but that's why science-based targets are quite important. So that's one more bit of jargon. You'll also hear about a thing called nature-based solutions. Again, kind of the clue is partly in the name, but it's about using natural systems and processes to solve some of the problems that we have around carbon emissions and the absorption and the sequestration of carbon in a way that enables a just transition. Just transition is a very Scottish expression, but hopefully, again, it explains what we're doing. And in a nature-based solution, it's about using green carbon, blue carbon. Blue carbon is the sequestration capabilities of the oceans. Green carbon obviously is that of peatlands and woodlands and agricultural systems and grasslands, and goes on and on and on. But using these nature-based solutions to deal with climate change, to deal with famine and food security, to deal with water security, to deal with extreme weather events, to deal with health and well-being, etc. And it's a relatively simple concept, and it's rather than necessarily going down the route of things like carbon capture and storage, which is a very dominant thinking, and direct air capture and lots of mechanical solutions, engineered solutions. This is more about trying to take a systemic nature-based solution, which more people can engage with, and improve the quality of everybody's lives, not just by creating basically climate factories. So adaptation and mitigation will get talked about a lot, and do get talked about a lot. And to put a sort of accountant's hat on, this is what they call double materiality. So what climate change does to us and what we do to the climate is the simple way to see that. And going through some examples, mitigation is the business of reducing carbon and other greenhouse gases from things like transport, heating and cooling, energy generation, agricultural systems, waste generation and management. And yeah, and this is a bit where there are opportunities in the business world, and particularly for the SME sector. Low carbon travel, like walking, bikes, electric vehicle infrastructure, home heating and cooling infrastructure, transition finance and transition skills are all areas where the SME sector can be very strong, because local solutions as a service are ideally suited to the SME sector. And solving climate change and climate change related issues is going to be done at a local level. Governments and the UN and the EU and so on can pass lots and lots and lots of legislation. And we saw an announcement yesterday from our own government about how we want to do some of these things. But at the end of the day, solutions have to be delivered locally, and they're going to be delivered by local organizations, many of them in the SME sector. And solutions as a service is probably where we're going. It's less about buying a thing, owning a thing. It's more about using a service, because that is a low carbon approach in its own right. A little bit about adaptation. Adaptation is living with the impacts of climate change in very simple terms. Things like air quality, extreme weather. How do we live with flooding, drought, wildfires, storms, etc.? And then let's get less attention, the social impacts, things around migration, disease, and what comes along with that is insecurity. So for the first time in Glasgow, in a couple of weeks' time, there will actually be a dedicated session on climate and security. So this is where the security organizations of the world, this is the defense community and so on, are actually going to sit down and talk about not only, again, using the double materiality factor, they're going to be talking about their carbon emissions. In the UK, the Ministry of Defence are responsible for 50% of the central government's carbon emissions, but also some of the challenges that they anticipate as a result of climate change. And as they are, they are strategic planners by profession, the military around the world. They think about the future a lot and they plan for it a lot. And they've been doing a lot of the work that underpins this is done by the defence community, who are looking at various different scenario models going forward. But social impacts of adaptation of climate change are something that we have got to find a way to adapt to. And there are lots of opportunities. It's not a negative story. Opportunities include building an infrastructure design adaptation, and again, harking back to the announcements of yesterday and some of the commentary this morning around the adaptation of the use of heat pumps and so on. As I'm lucky enough to have just moved into a brand new house, which is airtight and has a heat pump and everything else, and it works fantastically well together. But trying to fit a heat pump into the flat I'm in Glasgow at the moment would be very challenging, and it needs very serious engineering and maintenance. Community resilience shouldn't be overlooked, and there's going to be, I believe, a lot of opportunities in helping both build capability and capacity in communities to deal with some of the current challenges of climate change. Inevitably, we are going to need to have a more organised and effective community response to extreme weather events, is in a very simple case. And then again, health management, transition finance and transition skills development. That comes up twice because this transition has got to be paid for. Some of it is going to be done through taxation, but some of it's going to have to be done through investment and channeling money towards green finance and green tools is incredibly important. And skills. We can't do this without reskilling the workforce. And we'll talk about this in another slide, but I call this social circularity. How do we adapt people? Another bit of jargon that inevitably comes up, and again, anybody looking for investment might very well see this, is the term ESG, which stands for environment, social, and governance factors. It's very much investor focused and is about disclosure and reporting. I think most investors these days, or most people looking for investment, can expect many people right the way down to the high street banks to ask about something to do with your environmental credentials, your social credentials, or your governance. And governance it's almost the wrong way around. Governance should be at the front of that. Talked about social circularity, or this is the circular economy. Again, is going to be talked about a lot around COP and is a key plank of the whole sustainability agenda. And it's about using one person's process waste, materials, and the resources in a number of different ways. The next iteration of the product, the classic circular economy, is glass. Today, we recycle very large quantities of our glass, and glass is fungible. Glass you can take a green glass bottle and turn it into another green glass bottle with lower carbon impact, lower social impact, lower transport, and everything else. A perfect piece of circular economy. The quality of the product doesn't change. You can continue to use it. Another glass example is raw materials for another product. So let's talk about windscreens. Windscreen glass, or the windscreen in your car, bus, lorry, whatever, it's normally laminated. The glass in that goes to make glass when that windscreen is recycled, and a very, very large percentage of them, certainly in Europe, nearly 100% of the windscreens that we replace can be recycled. The glass goes to make glass fiber that goes into building insulation. So that then has another 50-year life. The average life of a windscreen, I'm told, is about 8 years, but if you turn it into glass fiber, it gets out to 50 years. But the glass can't be reused in optical glass for windscreens because the quality is not there. There's some low levels of contamination. And the PBB, which is the plastic laminate in the windscreen, that's separated out and it goes to make things like carpet backing and paint. And that's another bit of the circular economy. So that's where you're downgrading a product. You can take a mobile phone like that, and you can put it through a grinder and effectively get out the various different components to it. But the rare earth metals that come out are not of a sufficient quality to be able to make another mobile phone with them. They can be used for other things. So you're going down a layer in terms of the hierarchy. Circular economy really is to try and keep things at the same level. And again, there are loads and loads of opportunities for the SME sector in terms of innovation and so on. And opportunity there. Social circularity we've touched on. This is enabling people to transition into new roles using versions of their skills. And the classic one here is oil and gas workers building and maintaining wind farms. Oil and gas are my normal place of residence is the Shetland Isles, which is right at the top of the UK. We are very much an oil and gas economy and have been supporting the North Sea since the 70s. Many of the people who and we are now seeing the North Sea being actively decommissioned. There's a big opportunity there for skills, but there is also a big opportunity for wind farms. And many of the people who used to work, who live in Shetland, who used to work in the oil and gas industry, now work in the offshore wind industry. Classic piece of social circularity where we're using those skills, tweaking them a bit and applying them to a new transition industry. NDCs, nationally declared contributions. This is the key component at the heart of COP26 in particular. 6 years ago, COP21, everybody was asked to go away and develop their own nationally declared contributions, which is a list of actions that you will take as a signatory to achieve a 1.5 degree goal. And you've got to show the calculations, so show your homework about what impact each action is going to take, and you've got to show how that's going to be achieved and when it's going to be achieved by. And for the first time at this COP, the UK has its own NDCs. Previously, we've been nested inside the EU's NDCs. And some of the announcements we've already seen from the government around gas boilers and cars and internal combustion engines and everything else, excuse me, are to help deliver our NDCs. And some of the hundreds of millions of pounds that have been pledged to deal with nature-based solutions and so on are all part of that as well. So the big mantra for COP26 in terms of what it wants to achieve and what we as the president of COP, that's the UK, we share the presidency with Italy. So most of the pre-COP events have been taking place in Italy. Is the mantra from the Prime Minister is coal, cars, cash, and trees. Those are the four things he wants to achieve, and we know he likes these sort of things. So coal is about the removal of coal as a power generation tool, not getting rid of another typo in there. Coal can still be used in other industries. Obviously, coal is an important part of the steel industry. It's a hard-to-abate sector, but to make steel, we still need coal, and we need coal in other processes as well, or the byproducts of coal. So I think we will still see some low-level coal mining going on, but the big thing around coal is we need to stop coal-fired power generation. Not a problem here in the UK. We're down to fractions of percent of our energy is produced by coal. Across Europe, slightly more. In the US, quite a lot. In China, they're still building coal-fired power stations. And of course, some of the geopolitics that are going on around COP26 with the Chinese are to do with their commitment to coal. And it's obviously also a very popular power source and raw materials, so economic engine in large parts of the developing world. Cars, transition away from fossil fuels and transport. I mean, I suspect anybody who reads the paper knows as much about this as they need to know. We all need to move away from internal combustion engines. You won't be able to buy them in the UK in 10 years' time. And move to electrification, possibly hydrogen power. There are many, many different solutions that will come forward. The infrastructure to support all that needs to be put in place. And a lot of people are very skeptical about how do we do this. And very relevant to this audience, an Oxfordshire audience, Dieter Helm at Oxford University, when challenged about this in the past, has suggested that what we're asking people to do in terms of their transition of fuel type around heating and around transport and so on is about the same in terms of infrastructure and policy shift as it was when we moved from town gas to natural gas. I'm just about old enough to remember town gas. I certainly remember the the derelict gasworks that seem to exist in every town and city I've ever visited, now obviously all been redeveloped. But that was a massive transition in fuel. And I think looking back at that period of time, we probably don't understand quite what, but quite how big that challenge was. But we've done it before, we can do it again. Cash. This requires significant transition investment. We saw the government net zero strategy yesterday. In parallel to that, and I haven't read all 370 pages of it. Alongside it, the Treasury also released its take on what it's going to cost the country to do this. It's significant. We are going to see changes in the way that taxation is delivered and the way public finances are delivered. But it's all about directing investment within our own economy to this transition, but then also allocating money to the developing world. Because actually the single biggest stumbling block in Glasgow could very easily be the same as it was in Copenhagen 10 years ago, 10 COPs ago, 11 COPs ago, when there was no commitment from the development world to the developing world. It was very much a first world kind of COP, and lots of people just refused to play ball. And we have to avoid that happening again. So we have to find cash to help the developing world. Trees, nature-based solutions, both for adaptation and mitigation. Trees is now just a simple analog for all of the nature-based solutions that are around there. But agriculture is a really big challenge. Agriculture is the second or third largest carbon emitter around the world. We have to think about how we adapt our agriculture to cope with everything that's going on in terms of that, both adaptation and mitigation. So the impact that agriculture has on the climate, but also the impact that the climate has on agriculture is incredibly important, because otherwise we're going to start getting some of those social issues around migration and famine, and you don't need me to tell you how that can happen. So other COPs. Yeah, another COP that is likely to get talked about quite extensively around COP26 is COP15. And this is the Convention on Biological Diversity, otherwise known as CBD. It's taking place in Kunming in China. Should have taken place last year. Should have taken place this year. Now likely to take place next year. And it's got to set some new global biodiversity targets. What expired 2 years ago is a thing called the Archie targets, which was set up at COP, go back along for COP8, I think, where international biodiversity targets were set. And an example of how COPs don't work and how some of these things fail is every single Archie target was comprehensively missed. But we have not taken biological diversity and nature seriously enough in our thinking around climate change. We very much looked for engineering and technical solutions. We've looked at lifestyle changes. We haven't looked at what the impact is that we're having on biodiversity and nature. And nature supports everything that we do. It's where all our food, our clean water, our clean air, everything comes from nature. It does not come out of engineered solutions. And the work of CBD and the Convention on Biological Diversity and the new set of targets that will come out of Kunming is about how we're going to tackle some of those things. And they all link back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I've not really talked about at length here or at all. Moving on to the EU. So the EU is one of the more progressive legislative policy-making forums where they've made some very clear decisions around how they want to see everybody cope with climate change and its consequences. That is basically wrapped up in a thing called the European Green Deal. And the reason I've put this in here is because we're not in the EU, but we are still in Europe. And a lot of us will want to trade with Europe. And we will need to meet some of their standards. And again, if we're interested in European investment, we've got to meet some of their standards. And a lot of the next 4 or 5 slides are all about the investor community and the requirements they're increasingly asking for of the people they invest in. So the aim of the European Green Deal is to cut carbon emissions, achieve economic growth, but not tied to resource use. And it's that decoupling which is quite important. And anybody who can help with decoupling is, going to be in an advantageous position. And ensuring that no one's left behind. So it needs to be fair. The European Union has agreed to make climate neutrality by 2050. It's a legally binding. They're going to make it a legally binding target. It's not yet a legally binding target, but they will. And they are using the 1990s levels as their pre-industrial point. And they're going to reduce greenhouse gases by 55% by 2030. So that's, in 8 years' time. And that's a fairly serious target. And to do that, they've started a whole range of quite tedious but quite important actions. They've upgraded non-financial reporting directive. So this is the requirement on businesses to disclose non-financial activities. Came into force a couple of years ago. Mostly now currently focused only on large businesses, but they've got to discuss environmental matters, social employee aspects, respecting human rights, anti-corruption and bribery issues, and the diversity of their boards and their leadership. Again, simple things, but this is moving away from the idea that business is purely about the bottom line and annual reporting is just about a P&L and the balance sheet. There is now significantly more to that, and those who are looking for investment are now looking very closely at all of these issues. Applicable as of this year is a thing called the Sustainable Finance Reporting Directive, SFRD. Yes, more of the lexicon. It's introduced more stringent disclosure-related requirements on the financial market participants and financial advisors. So this is about directing investment towards green businesses. If you are setting up a green business and you can demonstrate that you are a green business and you're making a contribution to solving those problems, then you're more likely to get investment or more likely to get further up the investment community's kind of list of available investments because of their requirements to deal with things like this. And the aim is to provide more transparency on sustainability within the financial markets and to prevent greenwashing. We'll get on to some of the more stringent measures around dealing with greenwashing in a minute. And this comparability is important so that investors can actually see which is the most green investment if that's where they want to go. Next thing that's coming down the track is another directive, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is just ratcheting up the requirements of NFRD and SFRD. It's ranging the scope, so including smaller businesses. Anybody who is listed within Europe will fall into scope for CSRD. So you don't have to be 500 million and 500 employees and things like that. Every listed company, and also quite a lot of non-listed companies, so smaller non-listed companies, which again affects the SME sector, certainly at the S end, the smaller end, not so necessarily, sorry, the medium end, not at the micro end. And it's mandatory against some standards. As an additional, and again, the additional comment is to do the double materiality concept. So, the impact of climate on me and my impact on climate. And looks forward, setting progress thresholds and targets, and to disclose information relating to intangibles, so social, human, and intellectual capital. So we're now really getting away from it's just about the numbers. And the first standards will be adapted towards the end of next year, but there are draft standards out in consultation at the moment. And they will in the future need to be assured as well. So independent assurance, limited assurance. And this is the tool they're going to use to kind of do all the comparison stuff. The excitingly titled Taxonomy Regulation. Once upon a time, I used to be a proper biologist, and taxonomy didn't mean any of this, but it does now. Key tool for the legislators. It creates a common set of definitions about sustainable activities in 6 different categories: adaptation, mitigation, circular economy, water pollution, social, and I can't remember what the 6th one is. And I don't think I've got a list of them for you, but look up taxonomy regulation. There's a lot of stuff out there, very simple user guides produced by most of the insurance and the accountancy firms are all writing their own simple guides, 2-page guides to the taxonomy. But it's putting environmental data into context. It's creating these holistic sets of expectations. It's rewarding companies for following the direction set by the science and based targets. And it allows investors to compare financial products. If you're an SME in Oxfordshire looking for investment, and you're looking across the whole of Europe because you believe you've got a world-beating product, then this is something that you will need to think about, because you may be asked questions. They may be diluted. So the large investment houses may be asking, for very large private equity companies, they'll be asking some quite detailed questions. But I think we need to. Everybody is going to get affected by this trickle down over the next few years. And in the UK, what are we doing? Well, there was a big announcement yesterday, which I haven't had an opportunity to really absorb, but obviously a lot of the press coverage is around the move away from gas boilers. We're not going to be connecting any new houses to the gas grid from 2030, and you won't be able to get a gas boiler after 2035. And everybody's going to move over to some form of ground source, air source, heat pumps of some description, or water source. So not many of those around, but they are very effective. But the other things that are happening is we're going to be adopting, as of next year, the mechanisms of the climate-related Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, which is currently a voluntary G20 initiative. It's mainstreamed into annual public finances, and asset owners and asset managers have to report on four new areas. The two is missing. Governance, strategy, risk management, targets and metrics. Governance is about, does your board understand the risks that it's being exposed to around climate change? Strategy is, have you thought about how climate change is going to affect your business plan over the next 5 years? Risk management is, have you quantified that? You've done some proper scenario modeling. And metrics and targets is about, what are you expecting? And UK legislation is expected to come into force next year. We're expecting we've seen draft regulations at the moment. It's all coming in under the Companies Act. So it's not actually a new piece of law. It's an existing piece of legislation being used as a vehicle for this. And it will require TCFD style reporting from all companies with a turnover of greater than 500 million and 500 employees. Now, I don't imagine there's anybody involved in this community that ticks that box. But if you're working or hoping to work with companies that fall into scope on this, they will start looking at you as part of their what's called Scope 3 emissions, part of their supply chain. You may be asked questions when tendering for work around how you can contribute to their reporting, and have you made considerations. And then in the future, we are expecting a task force on nature-related financial disclosures. They had the first meeting of this task force last week, supported by the UN Environment Programme and the Development Programme and the World Wildlife Fund and Global Canopy. It's hosted in the UK by Nature Finance, and it is committed to delivering similar frameworks around nature-related risks. And so the impact that we all have on nature is going to be incorporated on that. We're not expecting to see anything from them until 2023, and it probably won't turn up in mandatory reporting for some time after that. But just to be aware of the fact that these things are happening. So what do I need to do? So I suppose this is the bit that most of you are most interested in. Act now and tackle the basics. The basics are energy, waste, water and travel. How can we reduce energy consumption? How can we not just move to a green tariff, but how can we actually deal with consumption rather than a green source? Deal with energy conservation first. How can we reduce our energy use? And there are lots of different ways of doing that, but start off with an energy audit, and then look at building infrastructure and energy consumption, making things airtight, draft-proof. And then look at whether or not with new activities, if you're moving into new units, new facilities, new office space, can we actually start from the beginning with things like using underfloor heating and air source heat pumps, mechanical heat recovery. I mean, these are now well tried and tested technologies. Looking at waste, there is a huge amount of carbon in waste. Not only is waste a valuable resource, there's a vast amount of carbon in it. And if we can reduce the amount of waste that we're dealing with, the amount of waste we're sending to landfill, so if it's organic waste, is it compostable? Can it go into biodigesters? Can we produce energy from it? Can we be recycling more of that component? Can we be staying further up in the circular economy? Water comes in two larges. The potable water that we want to drink, it's not particularly expensive here in the UK, but if we can reduce water consumption, that's a good thing. But the other thing is dealing with sewage and drainage, and obviously flood risk, and making sure that your properties and your products are resilient is very important. And the last one is travel. We all travel a lot, and I'm sure in the post-COVID, post-Zoom world, we'll want to go back to seeing people face-to-face, because it's a really, really, really important part of how we do business. We can't do business without actually, I believe, seeing customers. So we're going to have to find ways of traveling, and we need to think about how do we travel. Is it cars? Is it bikes? Is it buses? Is it trains? Is it flying? We will fly. Aeroplanes will not stop happening in the world. We just need to understand how we might be able to do that in a more realistic way, and think about offsetting. Is the other area. Think about, actually, do we want to do offsetting? If we do want to do offsetting, how do we want to do it? Is it down nature-based solutions, or is it around more engineered solutions like direct air capture, which is becoming increasingly popular because it's linear and quantifiable? Customers are asking for it. Customers will continue to ask for it. More customers. We can offer it to our customers, saying, actually, this is a market differentiator that gives us some competitive advantage. And investors will certainly ask about it, and they'll ask about the risk associated with it. So that gets us to the end of this bit. Just to tell you a bit about the thing that I've been trailing at the top, which I was asked to, which is the Oxfutures Oxford Green Tech event coming up in November. Beyond COP26, and it's worth saying that, in my opinion, that the post-COP26 conversation is probably going to be more intense than the pre-COP conversation, because we'll know exactly what happened. We'll be able to celebrate some degree of success, and we'll be also worrying about some lack of success. There will be things that we will miss. I'm sure of that. So 2-day conference. It's kind of online again, mornings only, 3 hours, 10 till 1, speaker presentations and discussions. And day one themes, COP26, what does it mean nationally and at the Oxford level? Low carbon economy, collaboration, how do we work with others, which is incredibly important. I think most of the business I now do is pretty much all collaborative. Oxford Super Hub, and the green tech strategy. And then on day 2, we're just looking at what Oxford County Council are enabling in terms of low carbon future. The Oxford Cambridge Knowledge Arc, very powerful, potentially very, very powerful source of business development. Sustainable building boom, access to green finance, as we've discussed, the investor community, circular economy. You'll get much more expert speakers than me on that. And the road to net zero, practical advice for businesses. And to find out more about that, search for Oxford Green Tech on Eventbrite, which is where you can book your place. And the very last thing before we get into the Q&A session, I think we're okay for time, are we? Yeah, we've got 15 minutes left. Next steps and what's how. So the next one of these presentations that I'm involved with is on the 9th of November at 12 o'clock again. And rather than being this very high level piece that I've talked about today, to sort of set the scene, we're going to talk about practical steps that SMEs can take. There'll be an update from what's going on down the road in a couple of weeks' time here in Scotland, and what that means for the UK and Oxford businesses. It'll be a very, very rough, first impressions. We'll be 3/4 of the way through COP by the 9th of November. But it starts in 11 days' time. So the clock is very firmly ticking, and ticking very fast. Thank you for that. I shall stop sharing my screen, and we'll see if there's any questions. I have no idea.
Thanks, Matt. We haven't had anyone post any on yet, but if anybody does want to unmute and ask a question, then please do. Everybody's quiet.
Oh, hi, can I, okay if I ask a question, Lucia? Matt, you mentioned scope 3, and obviously there's a scope 1 and a scope 2. recently joined as a non-exec director of Good Food Oxfordshire. I don't come from the industry. I come from running telecoms and digital consultancy. So I'm trying to get up to speed with this stuff. Now, food seems to fit into scope 3, but I just wonder if you could explain a bit more what progress you see has been made in creating standards and targets and progress for maybe scope 1 and 2, and how scope 3 might fit into that.
So scope 1 and 2 is quite well developed. That was developed initially through the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and there's quite a lot of online. If you just search Greenhouse Gas Protocol, there's lots and lots of online training about that. But scope 1 and scope 2 is the energy that you buy from the grid, and then the fuels that you use for heating. Those are the two things that fit into scopes 1 and 2. So the energy that you buy in the form of electricity, and then the energy that you buy in terms of gas, and some scope. This way it gets a little bit hesitant and boundary start to become problematic. The fuel that you use in your vehicles can be scope 2, but it is more likely to be scope 3, because scope 3 is your supply chain, both inbound and outbound. So the impact of the stuff that you buy, the raw materials, the goods and services, and then the goods and services and the raw materials that you sell, and the facilities and logistics underneath that. So food, generally speaking, is a scope 3 consideration, unless you are a farmer. Does that help?
Yes, it does. It sets me on the road. I think this is a destination. It's a destination. Sorry, it's a journey, not a destination. This one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if in the next one it's beneficial to people, just tell me, and I can do a very quick couple of slides on scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scopes 1 and 2 are relatively straightforward. Scope 3 is significantly complicated, and it's big, and it's not easy to calculate. I'm working with a couple of businesses at the moment who want to do science-based targets, and they need to understand their scope 3, and it is a disproportionately large part of the time, effort, money to do the calculations, because it is so multi-headed.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks.
Okay. No, thank you, Stuart. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
No, somebody just shared in the chat that it was difficult to find on Eventbrite, so I've just put a direct link into the event so people can get tickets if they want any.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? I think that's probably it, Matt. I think.
Oh, okay.
Thank you to everybody for joining us. Thanks to Matt for running through that session. What links are there to the uni? Kim's asked a question about what links there are to the uni. I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
No, neither do I. Sorry.
Kim, do you want to unmute or put some more information?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get it in before you closed.
That's okay.
What I meant was, I mean, I've just come from a meeting, sort of a university meeting, all about similar things, and then I sort of come to this meeting around about Oxfordshire as well. It just feels like there's sort of two worlds which could do well with being together. And I'm just wondering, you know, where do you perceive the connections for SMEs from all the people in the university working on net zero things? Is there any sort of collaboration or overlap? I know there's people like Sam Hampton and things who work in both, but I don't know. Just feels like there might be something there that could be useful.
I think that the event that's bioregional are hosting it with Green Tech, and I think they've got quite a lot of the links into the universities and are further on the journey than possibly Oxlep are in terms of the collaborations. They're leading it more than we are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of the underpinning. A lot of underpinning research. A lot of underpinning research is coming out of various different bits of all of the universities, but Oxford has got a very leading role to play in that, as well as some of the technological developments. So it's in two different places.
Yeah, the other hat I wear is sort of working with schools on climate issues, and one of the things I'm always trying to do is get kids to realise that companies are doing things on climate, which is really interesting and is going to make future careers really interesting. And so it'd be amazing if we could flag up to the local sixth formers what all this sort of energy and stuff that's going on, you know, actually all the activity that's going on in local organisations somehow, because I think there's a real sort of blind spot. They're all still sort of looking at traditional careers. You guys are all doing amazing stuff. And, you know, how can we sort of close this gap is a real, I think it's a real opportunity, because the kids are looking to COP And if you guys are also kind of looking in that direction, how can we use your energies to enthuse them and vice versa? Is it just an open question?
No, it's a very good question, and quite a lot of the conversations that I have with businesses and public sector bodies is that one of the reasons that they are wanting to communicate more about what they do is because they understand that there is an assumption, it may not be true, but there is an assumption that the next generation of people coming into the workforce are basically only going to want to work for employers who've got good credentials around climate and biodiversity and social value and so on. I hope that's true. I sincerely hope that's true. But a lot of employers are putting a lot of emphasis because they think it's an important recruiting tool. If you want to get the best of a particular cohort of candidates, they think they need to do this. So it's also a skill set they're looking for. I mean, I work with a lot of businesses who have quite big graduate and apprentice recruitment programs, and they are definitely looking for people who've got the skill sets to move into this area, to cope with design and maintenance and manufacture and support services and so on. So,
yeah, I'd really like to sort of see more opportunities for sort of work experience for local kids in the companies that it's doing anything. It doesn't, they don't have to be sort of cutting edge, but if they're doing anything on sustainability or green stuff, the kids would just love it, because quite frankly, the list of people who are offering work experience at the moment tends to be the ones that are really well established and not necessarily at the cutting edge of these things, and not in the departments that are doing anything about it. And there's a huge demand out there from kids for interesting work experience. So please.
Yeah. No, I can feed that back into the businesses I work with. Yeah. That if you want, it's always, the work experiences I think is a very separate but very difficult area for a lot of people to get their head around.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Thanks, Kim.
Anyone else? Raise your hand. Switch your microphone on and talk. Okay.
There we go then. I think that's probably it, Matt. If we'll look forward to seeing everyone at the next session, if you can join us, and please sign up to the 2-day conference if you are free on those days as well. I'll send out a copy of the recording to everyone on the chat, and also just some links to the other support that Oxford can provide, whether you're interested in engaging with any of the other support options. We do lots of one-to-one sessions, small programs, grant funding. So if you're keen to know more, then I will put my contact details on that email as well. But thanks again, Matt, for that session, and we look forward to the next one.